Welcome to the 23 Mile podcast. I am Kayode, and today we're joined by Edwina Sharrock, founder of BirthBeat, Australia's first fully online childbirth education platform. Edwina is a registered midwife from Tamworth, a regional town in New South Wales, Australia, who became what she calls an accidental entrepreneur. BirthBeat started off in a living room after the closure of a local maternity ward left her community without vital childbirth education. That single act of passion grew into a national digital health platform. Along the way, she appeared on Shark Tank Australia, securing a deal from a famous Australian entrepreneur. But she turned around and rejected that deal and also bought out an external investor she brought on because she wanted 100% control of our platform in order to protect its mission. Her work has earned her many prestigious honors, including a Medal of the Order of Australia for service to community health and a fellowship with Cartier Women's International. After 8 years of building, she recently engineered an exit, selling BirthBeat to medical technology leader Device Technologies to ensure its mission will endure for years to come. Edwina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start at the very beginning. You grew up in what I'll call a regional city, but it's also known as the country music capital of Australia.
I was going to say, we are famous for that fact. I like that you've done your research. So Tamworth is, in Australia, we would call it a regional town. 50,000, the population. So to your global audience, that sounds really small, but in New South Wales, it's actually considered a reasonably sized town. However, for 10 days of January each year, that population doubles when we host the Tamworth Country Music Festival. Only for 10 days of the year. We're not all walking around with guitars and cowboy boots for the rest of the year, but it's a lot of fun. It's a really great festival. But it is, a small regional town, and it's where I was born.
What was growing up like in Tamworth?
When you're a child, you don't realise how idyllic it was. Now I'm raising my own children. We're out on a bit of land. Like right now, what I'm looking out at is a paddock, a few cows. We've got the next door neighbours on his tractor. It's beautiful. It's a very innocent, very safe neighbourhood. But when you're a young teenager living in that, you think it's really boring. So I, straight after school, went to Sydney, and was really excited to leave Tamworth. But now as an adult back home, I love it. Life is just so easy.
What was that transition like from a small city girl to being in a large city like Sydney?
Loved it. Absolutely thrived. I was so excited to leave a small town. I really loved sport. I went to a residential college. It also happened to be the year, and now I'm going to give away my age, but it happened to be the year that Sydney hosted the 2000 Olympics. So for someone who loves sport, it just seemed like the most unbelievable year to move to Sydney. And it was just, non-stop fun. Possibly wasn't the best university student.
And what about growing up? Were your parents entrepreneurs? What was growing up like?
So I had done a very traditional nursing, then went back to university to study midwifery. I love learning. I realise now. I realise my love of learning very likely came from my father, and he ran his own business. And again, he was a vet. So he was our local vet in this town, very well known, very well respected, worked incredibly hard. That's the key piece that I think I learnt from him, was that work ethic, which has served me well at times and maybe served me not so well at times.
I can very much relate to that work ethic, and we'll come back to it. Since the pandemic, healthcare has come up as something people really appreciate. But back then, we're looking back 20, 25 years. What was the motivation for you to go into this field?
It's not a very inspiring story, I've got to be honest. It was more about, I knew the residential college I wanted to go to. I knew that I wanted to play hockey at a certain university. So I went to Sydney University, and it was like I got to the end of my high schooling, needed to choose a degree to facilitate those things. And my best friend was studying nursing, and she said, it's great, you can travel with it, you'll always have a job. And I remember just sort of thinking, that will do. Not actually really thinking that would be my, chosen career for life. We had our first semester of learning. You go into a clinical placement, like that's one of the things you do in nursing. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved all the different types of nursing I've done. I'm the biggest advocate for nursing, particularly if you're looking at your first degree, because you can build so much on it. And like every opportunity I've had, I've done retrieval. So I've gone in helicopter retrieval. I've worked for our New South Wales Fire and Rescue. Do you know what I mean? Like I've done so many cool things that I've been able to do because it started with nursing. So I'm incredibly grateful that I made that choice.
Very interesting, but I'm not surprised at all that the career that you love, that has made you famous, that has made you recognized, was almost an accident. That's how life works, right? You just go into it and never know what's going to happen.
There's a lot of those, I feel, sliding doors moments when I look back over my career. Like, yeah, it feels really uncomfortable. I don't really want to do this, but I will, and we'll work out how to do it later. That's definitely my personality, is just, why not? Say yes, figure it out later. Maybe it's a deep fear of missing out if I don't say yes. So I just say yes. And again, like it's worked out well.
You said yes to nursing, and then the career. What was, the early years of, doing it?
So the first type of nursing that I specialised in is called NICU in Australia. So Neonate Intensive Care Unit. That then led me into midwifery, actually doing midwifery and supporting women birthing their babies and their families. Again, it doesn't sound, but for me and my personality, the woman actually does all the work. Do you know what I mean? Like you're essentially a bystander. So I found it a bit like I missed the intensive care and the medical side of nursing. So I actually left midwifery, went back and did critical care nursing, so emergency nursing. That's where I did the retrieval, and I loved that kind of nursing. Again, what often happens in health, you do your job well, you get promoted to management. I then got promoted to managing the maternity unit, and I'm not a very good middle manager. And I didn't love that experience, but I learnt a lot from that experience.
There's a theme I've picked up, which is your love of learning. Once you're not learning, it seems you just move on to the next thing. That's something I'm getting, and I recognize it. But this desire to learn, to help, led you to BirthBeat from a personal experience when you were pregnant. Can you tell us more about that?
And when you hear a lot more of other entrepreneurs' journeys, it's usually born out of frustration or them seeing that they could do something better or there's something missing, there's a gap in the market. And so literally 36 weeks pregnant with my daughter, Polly, who is now almost 14. And our local private maternity unit closed its doors. So no community consultation, no checking how this will affect people. And again, that's been a thread in my career and in my life that I realize I've taken from mum and dad. They were always the parents that were volunteering. They were always the parents that were showing up, to the school committees and the school fetes and volunteering their time, and very engaged community members. So the feeling to me was that I just felt a bit angry. I was actually choosing to birth at the public hospital, but I felt frustrated that that choice was taken away. And the impact on the community was then those people who wanted to birth at a private hospital would leave and go to other hospitals outside of our town. So it was just quite literally on a whim. I thought, well, why couldn't someone deliver, private classes? Because that's what the private hospital did very well. And I can be a little bit stubborn. So I actually didn't go to birth classes for Polly because I was like, I'm a midwife. I know what to expect. I know what to do. I'll be fine. But my poor husband, Ross, he was kind of robbed of that opportunity. And so once Polly was born, and like on the scale of births, it was quite a positive birth experience, but we were both left pretty shell-shocked. So you can know what is physiologically going to happen as a clinical midwife, but when you experience it as a mother and as a parent and you're birthing a baby, it's so intense and can be so overwhelming that I was really underprepared for that. So that got me really interested in then, why aren't women taught this? Why is it still such a backward, outdated way of learning? And that started that whole just deeply curious, got to be a better way, got to be able to deliver it where we don't just go and sit as a group of strangers in smelly secondhand bean bags and talk about a pretty intimate, exciting part of our life. And even now when I watch movies, you know, and they talk about birth just being this horrifying experience, it's not, and it shouldn't be. It can be a positive experience. And that passion was like, well, how do I teach and empower women and their families? Not tell them how to do it, because that doesn't empower anyone. So just give them the tools to make their own decisions. And I think that way of teaching was very new in this birth education space.
As a dad, really value what you're saying and what you've done over the years. Men also have a lot to learn.
Have a big role. So a big part of it was making sure BirthBeat didn't just prepare the mother, it prepared the family and the support person of what their role can be. So again, that's been a thread in my career and in my life that I realise I've taken from mum and dad. They were always the parents that were volunteering. They were always the parents that were showing up, you know, to the school committees and the school fetes and volunteering. Our tagline was bettering your birth experience, but it was a better birth experience for everyone.
Did you see immediately there was a business opportunity, or was this about let's just help one or two people?
It started out like very much one or two people. I never thought of myself as a business person. As I said, nursing is a great career, but it's also really good at kind of stifling ideas. You know, that's not what we do. That follow the process, don't try and disrupt it. And then coming into this entrepreneurial space, I didn't understand business. I didn't understand finance. I didn't know anything about scale. Like I say this because I think people don't really believe it. They're like, oh yeah, but I'm sure, you know, her husband was in VC, or, you know, her dad's an accountant or something like that. No, like I really didn't. And I used the example. So it just was sort of like a passion. Definitely there was a passion for me. I'm not being all like I was only doing it for the community. I liked doing it. I like teaching. I like educating. And then that was matched with a gap in the market. And at a time where I was doing small classes, you know, like just group learning, what happened was regionally a lot of other maternity units started to close their doors. So there was this need, and people were traveling. We had people traveling to Tamworth to come to our classes. It was at that stage that I was like, I think this has got legs. I think this could actually be a business. And I remember actually saying that to my husband, and this really shows how little I knew about business. And he was like, well, you know, the way to know that if this is going to be a business, does it make any money? And like, we were like 2 years in here, not paying myself a cent. And I said, I don't even know how to work that out. And he was like, well, you do a P&L. I was like, And we're on the phone, and I Googled, what is a P&L? Like that's, you know, and like I remembered, profit and loss. I remember that from business studies. Like so much Googling just on my own. How do you work out if you're making any money? And I was so excited because we'd made like a couple of grand in a year. And then my husband was like, what'd you put in your wages? I was like, oh yeah, I didn't pay myself a cent. You know, it was a hard lesson, but it was a really good lesson to go, how do you make this something that is profitable so that it's sustainable? So understanding those things really early on, and it wasn't that early on. I think I didn't pay myself for nearly 5 years. But once I invested in me, and I'm happy to talk about how I did that, and took myself seriously and understood my mindset, and, you know, really took the time to understand how to do a business in a profitable way, it was just a monumental shift. And that's when I actually decided to go online. It doesn't sound very innovative now. Like everyone's online, but you got to remember this 14 years ago. So, you know, there was a very different time 14 years ago. You weren't doing online courses. And so we were really well established, very well set up pre-COVID. So that was what just helped us explode.
You said that you were not paying yourself, and for a long time you combined your full-time job with the classes.
Yeah.
How long did that kind of, you know, double thing go on for?
Well, I then had a second baby. So Theo was 2 and Polly was 4. So we were, you know, 4 years into the business. I think when I went, I either make a business of this or I stay working full time, just to really add a lot of pressure. My husband also wasn't working at the time because he was building our house. So like it was that pressure cooker of, no money, time pressure, young kids. So like a lot of entrepreneurs, you sort of had to, I was put in a position, which I'm actually grateful for, but there was a lot of pressure to either make the decision to stay and work full time at the hospital, or if I wanted to do BirthBeat, it couldn't be a hobby.
Man, I love this. I love this story because a lot of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs have this thing where they say it's too hard to run a business as a side hustle. But my opinion is it is a very useful validation period, such that by the time you leave a full-time job, you already know that this has legs.
Yes. And I always feel like there's so many schools of thought. Everyone thinks they're a professional and the authority in, like, I will say particularly as a non-technical, first-time female founder, the amount of advice, warranted or unwarranted, whether I asked for it or not, that was offered to me, it got to the point where it was quite overwhelming. People are so forceful sometimes in their opinions. One of the biggest things that helped me in terms of my scaling the business was actually just making all of those voices go on mute. I remember having an actual expert in the field tell me that I could dress a little more to fit in at the startup hub. And I was like, so what do you mean? I knew exactly what he meant. But all the tech bros were all there in their black, this is early Airtasker. They're all there in their matching t-shirts and caps and jeans and cool shoes. And I was in my pink and floral. And so that's a red rag to a bull to do that to me. So I was overtly feminine. I was overtly dressing in my florals just to really say, stick it to you, mate. That's not the only kind of person who can be an entrepreneur in Australia. They don't all need to look the same.
As an entrepreneur, you have to chart your own path. You need to find what works for you.
So that's important as well, because so many people in this entrepreneurial space are just having so much fun and get quite evangelical about their brand, but they're not aware of what are their sales doing? What's their reoccurring revenue? What are the numbers that actually count? So you got to find that happy medium.
Speaking my language as a finance person.
Yeah.
So moving on from that whole, running out as a side hustle to then going online and then going full time.
Mm-hmm.
How did you navigate this transition?
I think you've used the word navigate and I engineered. I didn't. I was just very naive. I was having a lot of fun. I was enjoying learning. I was expanding my mind. I was expanding my world. I had to travel a lot at that time to Sydney. That was challenging in itself. That's one of the downsides of regional. I was part of an accelerator, but it was Sydney-based. Nothing was offered online in those days. Again, being able to access accelerators and be part of that community online now is a great thing. It just didn't exist. I literally had to get on a plane every Sunday night, home Thursday night with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So it was a really challenging transition. I actually think if I knew what I was in for and understood on a deeper level the push and the hours and the hard work that was needed, I'm actually grateful that I was naive about it, because it would have been pretty overwhelming.
But so how useful were the accelerators?
I genuinely don't think I could have. No, that's not true. I could have done it. I couldn't have done it at the pace that I did it. It was very intense in terms of the learning. Also, I didn't bring any ego into the room each day at that accelerator. I knew that I was the greenest in the room. I had nothing to prove. I love strategy. I love looking at the plan. I love going and I can see all the pieces. So it was very clear to me from day one, use this. Also, I was away from my children. Use this and soak up absolutely everything. So every time we had a visiting entrepreneur in residence, I would say, can I book an hour with you after? What I don't understand, I was putting my hand up. I don't understand that. Can you explain that again? And it got to the point where the people in the class were like, oh, I'm glad you asked because I didn't know. And I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. If you don't know, why wouldn't you ask?
What are those things you did right that contributed to this long-term successful business and exit?
I think I stayed in my lane. So I knew about what I taught about. I was deeply passionate about that. People kept saying you should add products, you could upsell. And I was like, I don't really know anything about that space and I'm not passionate about it. But again, that push to be more profitable, more financially stable, the more you put yourself out there, the more people think you've just got to do more. I'll use an example. So we had the product of the childbirth education that went direct to consumers. And then we added another product, which was baby and child first aid. And again, that was born out of me as an emergency nurse, seeing people coming into the emergency department with really sick kids from quite preventable things. I changed how we teach the first aid to not being like your typical, you've got a cut, you put the bandage on, you apply pressure. It was like, what is a fever? When is it good? When should I be worried? How do I treat it? These things are really important as new parents. And then it grew into, someone said, people love and want to know about how to get their babies to sleep. So we added a third product and it was the sleep school. My kids were not great sleepers. Theo was a terrible sleeper. I'm not passionate about that space. I don't feel like it was I didn't have a joy teaching it. So we launched it. I felt the whole time that it wasn't really something that I was really backing. The product wasn't something that I loved doing. I think it was live for 3 months. It was profitable. It was successful in terms of all the business metrics, and we just cut it. We just scrapped it. And people in the team were a bit like, what? And I was like, I don't like it. I don't like doing it. And I think to sort of have that, you just got to back yourself with, am I actually enjoying this? Like, how does it feel? Sort of that getting out of your head and going, I love, and I've done a lot more learning about, that connection between our brains and our bodies. Your body's telling you, and so it would have been really hard. It would have been really tiring and things get exhausting if you're not loving it. So I would say, like, you've got to find something that you enjoy doing. I don't think just looking at profitability margins is enough to sustain a lot of people. Some people, that's their jam and they can sell whatever they like and just solely have that as their focus. That didn't work for me.
About a year ago, I wrote something. It was on this Venn diagram of finding success in the overlap routine. What do you love doing? What you're very good at, and what can make money?
I draw those 3 circles all the time when I'm talking to people, and I'm like, they're in the middle. That's your sweet spot. I love it. I love it. Like even when I'm talking to students and things, I'm like, find something the world needs, find something you like and you're good at doing, and make some money. And it's that simple. Go. Don't.
It's one of those things we could talk about forever. But moving on into the business itself, talking about finding your customers when you're now going away from word of mouth as a teacher in your living room to a national business that needs to grow. What was it like?
I look back and I just feel a bit sorry for me about how naive I was and how little I knew about marketing, and particularly, I will say, online paid social media marketing. I'll call it out. So I actually am a good and natural marketer in seeing opportunities. And, if I'm going to have a conversation, it's a conversation that's with intention. What do I want to share? What do I want to help someone with? Or what do I want to take away from it? Those sort of things. When it came to online paid social media ads, I found it hugely challenging to partner with somebody that I could trust because I was still bootstrapped. I was so conservative with my ad spend. And I think that was at a time where it was the algorithm and the way that it worked was, spend more, spend more, spend more, earn more. It just didn't feel comfortable to me and to my detriment. I think we could have scaled a lot quicker if And at this stage, I wasn't working with a coach. I have continued to, and I invested very heavily in business coaches. And what I addressed was my head noise around money and excess and spending. So there was a lot of my own personal head noise that was actually sabotaging the growth in the scale, because I couldn't release the control to these third-party marketing platform, agencies. So I have to accept my own impact there. And I think sometimes those agencies, particularly in those days, like this was the early days of paid ads, would just promise the world. And then if I wasn't getting the world, I just felt disappointed. So it was just a lot of each month reading reports. We didn't hit what we thought we'd hit. But I think actually, had I done the work on my own head noise around money, we could have scaled a lot quicker.
But what eventually worked out well in terms of the digital marketing scale?
Working with a business coach, focusing on really specific areas of the business that I wanted to focus on. So I had lots of people giving me advice, lots of mentors, lots of, advisors. But I think it's when you put skin in the game, you truly show up, you truly do the work, and that's what made the difference for us. So it was actually about a bit of releasing some control and letting the experts do what they do well, combined at a time that we would just test everything. We would have 6 different versions of every 3-second, 5-second, 10-second, 30-second. The testing was just unbelievable, but it's a lot of work. But I'm a good student, and so I would be like, righto, let's test again this week. And we did. We started to get really, really good traction. Where we lost traction, again, was particularly Facebook and Instagram were our bread and butter. And at COVID, the organic reach was so powerful.
You talked about as well how you learned to become a face of the business. Was it through your coaches that you realized that people wanted to buy from someone personable? Or?
I didn't start that with the intention. It was only me. BirthBeat was me, literally sitting there with my babies in my home, and other mothers particularly connected with that. I didn't have my online persona and then my professional persona and then this just is me. And again, as your business grew and you put yourself out there more and more, and that, it does happen, that some people say some pretty unkind things and share their opinions in a very public way. So I'd sort of have these bursts of growth, and I love Instagram and I love BirthBeat. And then you'd have a week of, crying under the covers and I hate social media and I don't want to show up tonight. But the challenge is you've got to keep feeding the beast. So I knew and I understood enough to go, you just got to keep showing up. So particularly through COVID, everyone was, I would say, a lot more real. It was all a lot less polished. People were scared. The information was changing every day. One of the things I really feel like I became for particularly Australian women was the source of truth. So a lot of fear mongering, a lot of, different stories were being shared on social media. I would stick to the government health, latest information. I'd break that down. I'd share that on Instagram. We just had every night, I think for nearly 18 months, we'd do Q&A. I'd just be answering questions for women. They'd be saying, is my partner going to be able to come in with me? I'd say the latest recommendations is this, but it's changing every 24 to 48 hours. Check back in, but this is after I put the kids to bed, and I do it for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And now it just feels like such a long time ago. But even I was saying, we're at our local, JB Hi-Fi store, and I was looking at little video stands because I had video stands in the car, in the office, in the kids' nappy bags, because I was just always making content. I loved it. So that's why you can sustain doing it until I didn't, and then it's feels pretty exhausting.
But talking about COVID, that must have been said, right, it must have been a boon to the business. You being an online healthcare provider when the entire world was going through a crisis, but must have been stressful for you as well.
I feel like I was very, very fortunate. This then loops back to living in a small regional town. We didn't have cases for a long time. And then when we did, they were only really minimal. So we weren't in a large city. We had a very different experience to lots of other parts of the world. And that I'm incredibly grateful for. My husband and I, we were still able to work. We actually had a live-in au pair. So the kids' schooling wasn't greatly impacted. So there's a lot of things that I feel really grateful for. I'm a bit woohoo, and I feel like a lot of those things happened so I could really focus on BirthBeat, so I could help those women. I do feel really proud for the way that I showed up for that 2 years, because it was a really frightening time for a lot of people, particularly going into a hospital when everyone was saying stay out of a hospital, and some women, right in the thick of it, had to birth alone. And there's just something deeply, deeply wrong with having a woman have that birth experience with no friends, family, or loved ones around them. It's deeply wrong and sad.
How would you, if you put the pandemic period as say 18 months, how would you describe the growth in terms of percentage on the business?
It was awkward to say this at the time because that's when it boomed. Do you know what I mean? Businesses and doors were closing, so I stayed very quiet about that. However, the reason was, so there is an element of luck, but also the work that was done. I had been trying to sell my classes into private hospitals prior to the COVID pandemic. We'd had a few trials, we had a few paid clients. Then all of a sudden, every hospital in Australia and the world was not able to deliver face-to-face classes, and they didn't have an alternative. So I used my network and my network of midwives and professionals and obstetricians, and they knew then about BirthBeat. So that's when we actually went from BirthBeat being the preferred provider for these private hospitals to the private hospitals providing BirthBeat to their expecting parents, to rejigging our whole strategy, and we white labeled. So we actually created the platforms for the private hospitals to host their birth education. So it just took us from, a smaller B2C business, then into the B2B licensing software space. And then the third thing that happened was, how do all the organizations, particularly the large corporate organizations, support their expecting parents in the workplace? And I was able to again tap into my network and say, well, it's not about when they go on parental leave, it's the step before that. So our third sort of way of selling was into corporate organizations. We went from small through to really large, Salesforce being one of our largest corporate clients, who provided BirthBeat in their health and well-being packages.
It seems like when you started, it was a simple online offering, but now deep into the pandemic, I'm hearing of all this very complex tech behind the platform. What was your team like behind the scenes on the tech side?
I used to say small but mighty. So we only had a team of 3, and they were all locally here. We sat in a regional accelerator, the Smart Region Incubator. And again, I came out of the Sydney accelerator, came home to Tamworth. I didn't have any sort of like-minded community. I didn't have anyone that got what I was trying to do or the excitement of that space. It was all still really early, particularly in Australia. So at the time, the University of New England was just opening what is now called its Smart Regional Innovation. And so I sat in that office, and that was, I think, 11 years ago. And the joke is, I still sit in that office because I'm now employed as one of their expert in residence. I say I'm like the child that's never left home. When we sold BirthBeat and I took some time off, and I've got a busy brain and I wanted to get back into something, they offered me this and I was like, great, can I just sit at my old desk? So I've literally never cleaned out my desk. I took down the BirthBeat posters and put up the SRI posters.
Lovely. But then moving on into funding, which is every entrepreneur's favorite slash, most frustrating topic.
Favorite.
How did you get the business going in the early days of
Yeah.
going online?
So, started bootstrapped, didn't pay myself. I've said that. Then it was like a combination of grants. And definitely once I was becoming more aware around profitability and profit margins, that was when I was starting to work with a coach, sort of looking at where and really setting very clear financial goals, realizing we're going to need, as you alluded to as well, you can build new platforms, you can white label, you can grow. And our team was small, but obviously we had to outsource a lot of the work. We weren't doing all of that tech side of things. So we would just outsource and subcontract, and that takes money and a lot of money. But what I'm incredibly grateful for is early on, I did do a lot of it. I did do the hard yards, so that when you're engaging these subcontractors or providers, I was able to say, I can't see why it's costing that much. Or could you break that down for me? Because I do feel like you need to be quite astute and aware, enough to be dangerous is what my accountant often says. You've got to have enough knowledge so that you can ask the appropriate and smart questions when you're engaging people. Because again, the stories I've heard of people saying what they're spending on, and I'm like, it's a third-party platform. Why are you spending so much? Someone's just selling you something at this exorbitant price and pretending like they've done it themselves, whereas you can very, very quickly see that that's a basic third-party platform. So I was grateful that I learned a lot about that. Nothing we really did was that custom, because a lot of it was video content. So it just had to be fast and secure hosting for our video content. We never did an app. Do you know what I mean? We didn't there was all this push to do that. We just kept it so simple. And I'm grateful for that, because it also meant as well, we didn't have to put that huge investment in, because that then takes so much longer for you, to reap your rewards.
Amazing. I love that. Keeping it simple. But then you won a couple of competitions as well. Was it the Commonwealth Bank Innovation Award? Did that come with some cash?
Yep, that was 10 grand. And I remember at the time, it was very much needed, very, very much needed. A lot of times the bank account has just got to that almost we're not going to be able to pay wages, push through for another month. And again, I know that it's so set in this world of, it's a roller coaster. It just is. That's a saying for a reason. It's a very lived experience. You have your boom times, you have your hard times. Because I was bootstrapped, I knew that I could pick up some extra shifts. By that stage, my husband was working. We had really strict, tight budgets at home. We did the hard yards to make sure that we could get through that time. Again, I think that's often where a lot of businesses fold, because it just gets too hard. Thankfully, with the bootstrapping, we were able to understand how to get through those hard times. You alluded to Shark Tank.
Yes.
Again, it was pretty tempting to take that money.
Yes.
But it wasn't a good deal. That's just the reality of it. In terms of how our growth was month on month,
yes,
in terms of our profitability, to sell that percentage of the business for only that amount of money, it wasn't good business. So the myth of Shark Tank, or, the other what is it? The other ones in other parts of the world, Dragon's Den, is no due diligence is done before you go onto the show. So it's good television, but then you go into your DD period. So the offer was just not a good enough offer for me. But the kindness of the sharks and the network, and that I was able to stay in touch with them all, that was the true value of my experience going on to Shark Tank. And of course, free publicity on national television.
I love it. You can't buy that. So
no,
amazing.
Exactly. But again, I went into it really strategic. I was like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to just be the blonde woman who, gets seen as the puff piece in terms of doing the cute baby stuff. I locked myself in a hotel room the night before. I drilled myself on my numbers. I was like, I had a strategy, and I just think it's so important to do that before you go into these opportunities. And that's, that's what I've always done. Know your numbers. Oh my God, the amount of time I say that to people I coach. Do you know your numbers? And they're like, yeah, tell me your numbers. Oh, I just have to talk to my accountant, or I just have to run this report. And I was like, no.
Was it shortly after you actually raised some money from an external investor?
Yes. And like, I think raised as well is a bit of, is too generous to me. We took on VC investment of % of the business for a $50,000 raise. Like, so it wasn't big, it wasn't grand. I've now been among women who are actually raising, do you know what I mean? Like actually doing their ABC series, and it is exhausting. It's like every day walking in and saying, like, you're a dad. So like saying, hey, look at my beautiful baby, my gorgeous child. Isn't it lovely? And someone going, nah, it's ugly.
It's painful.
It's gut-wrenching. So I'm like, I challenge people on, do they actually have to raise? What is that going to change? Is that their focus at the moment? Is that going to fix their problems? Like often there's this thought that more money will fix a lot of problems, and actually you can fix the problems before you have to go through that whole process of raising. So, yeah. And then we bought them back out anyway.
How long into the process did you realize you didn't want them?
It was, and I'll be really honest in saying it wasn't the right cultural fit. I didn't have a go-to person. I thought when you took on investment, it would be like having that mentor, the advisors, people I could reach out to. That was not what we experienced. And we were really profitable, and I could buy them back out, and they were happy. They made their money. They certainly didn't get their 10x, but they did well out of us. And I got 100% ownership, and I didn't have to report to them. I didn't have to talk to them. I was happy. Everyone was happy. And then I was very determined that BirthBeat 100% was going to stay mine. Quite literally 3 months later, I'm having this conversation with a girlfriend from uni who I'd done nursing with, and she was a long-term employee of the organisation that did end up buying us in our entirety, and they're called Device Technologies. And she was like, I just think you should talk to them. They're a great company. They'd be really interested in what you're doing with the private hospitals. And I said yes. And I feel like I'm jumping ahead, so stop me if you don't want me to. But I met with their CEO, and I remember, I think we had like a 25-minute catch up, and it ended up going for an hour and a half. And by the end of it, he literally had the deal handwritten out. This is what it could look like. Because two things, he's an exceptional salesman. He works in sales, but he's a good person. I instantly liked him. I felt connected. He had this energy that was just felt around the whole office. I liked the culture of the organisation. And that was what really allowed me to kind of go, actually, I think this could be a good fit.
So you've described what you saw in Device Technologies. What would you say they saw in you that made you made him make an offer almost immediately?
It took me a while to actually process that, because that imposter syndrome and doubt really, really flared up then. Like, what do they see? And I would have those conversations. I think for them, it was about seeing a different possibility of how they could engage with the private and the public hospitals. So at the time, they're exploring what else could we be doing. So they were very much at the time just on selling products. So the opportunity of online education, being able to sort of add-on packages and upsell things like that was very attractive to them. I'm not entirely sure if they've continued to go in that direction. And I think once it's not yours, there's a period of separation where it's actually just healthy for me not to know. Like, I don't follow them on social media anymore. I've had to, and like, I've got good friends that still work in the business, and sometimes they'll try and tell me things, and I'm like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. It's not my baby anymore.
A question. Feel free to say no, but how good was the exit for you financially?
And I'm not going to disclose it, and because they're not a publicly listed company, so I don't have to. Again, it goes back to that enough. Like, it was the right number for me, because I will say as well, back to what we said earlier, everyone's got their opinion about how you could have got more, or I should have done it, or you should go to market, or that wasn't the intention behind BirthBeat. I didn't start it, grow it, scale it to exit. So that wasn't my focus. I live a full and wonderful life and I don't have to worry about things, and it's enough. And I'm like, I just feel like that's such a gift.
I mean, it's enough. That is enough for me as well. So thank you. One question, less than 2% of founders of businesses, innovative businesses, end up where you are, which is being able to sell. So I love that you're just really happy where you are. What are your tips in terms of achieving success? What do you tell founders today when you coach them?
I particularly work with women, and I work with women who are looking at that high growth, so scale, or looking to exit, or they're in an executive level and they want to make a change. I usually only work with women for like 6 to 12 months. I don't believe you should work with coaches for longer than that. It becomes a bit stagnant, or are they really serving you? So I like those short, sharp, get in, make a difference. I only work with people if I know I can make a difference, like people made a difference in my business journey. But what I would say in terms of it's backing yourself that your business is valuable. So many people I have conversations with. So the women I'm actually coaching, there's a really good, simple process to exiting a business, but it's simple, it's not easy. That's the thing. Like it can be really exposing, you know, that whole term of opening a kimono, you know, like you have to expose so much of your blood, sweat and tears, and you got to be ready for that. And you got to be ready to be asked the hard questions. And when people learn that, often they're just like, no, I think I'll just close the doors. I'm like, no, you've got to really back yourself in terms of the value of what you can offer.
It goes back to what we said earlier on, the ikigai, creating that unique value. And then on top of that, believing in yourself, like you said.
Yep. And that's when you have something you can sell. So there's so many reasons why people don't sell or exit a business successfully. Often that's around business model, so sustainability, being clear on what they wanted to build in the first place, what they didn't want. It is so complex, but the actual process of selling the business isn't as complex as I think everyone makes out as it is. It's all the other steps before.
We have this lovely exit that you navigated or engineered or fell in your lap.
Yeah, exactly.
But I am sure there are times where you nearly give up over the years.
Well, and I will say, in terms of worked hard is an understatement. So we had our final tranche on June 30, like a year ago, or no, longer than that. And I had a total hip replacement and was in hospital for 9 days, 10 days later. So in terms of pushing yourself to your physical and mental limits, on reflection, I was there. So lots of wins out of the business, but lots of sacrifices and compromises were also made in my personal life. And I now reflect on that word burnout and things like that. It's taken a bit of time for me to be able to go, yeah, I can really identify with when people that was just my reality.
I'm sorry to hear that, but what are some of the things that helped you actually stay in the game and stay on for so long?
I'm hugely competitive. I liked it. I had fun. Every step was learning something new. I loved the exit. I even loved the exit process. I even loved creating a data room because I was constantly learning. And now being able to support people and hold their hand in that process and kind of say, it's not as scary as you think. This is what's going to happen. Then they're going to say this. Then you got 90 days. Then you got this. Just breaking it down into being really simple. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't had that experience. So it might have been hard or tough at the time or tiring, but I wouldn't have built the skill set that I've got now had I not had that experience. So I'm a big believer of get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you're sitting in something and thinking, this feels really uncomfortable, there's probably a reason. It's because you're learning or you're outside of your comfort zone.
I just have a few quick fire questions. What is next for you?
And I forced 6 months off. My husband and I talked about it. I wasn't allowed to say yes to anything. Do you know what I mean? Had to say no. And then few things snuck in. I did a few volunteering roles, but I have a very busy brain. And I think I would have driven my family bonkers if I didn't go back to some sort of work. And so I just started, and for want of a better word, thinking about what my career portfolio will look like in the future. I wanted to do something. Women particularly, and the discussions around finance and the gross inequity in terms of accessing finance in Australia, as you said, less than 2% of female founders in Australia access VC funding. That's an unbelievable data point, and it's decreasing. And so I wanted to have some sort of role in changing or challenging that. And how I've thought about how I could best do that. Again, I don't think it's advocacy. I don't think it's politics. I actually just want to work one-on-one with founders who need that support. So I love doing that. I just have a small group that I coach. And that's just one-on-one coaching. I've got 3 board roles now, so non-executive director roles. I love that as well. It turns out entrepreneurs are actually really good at boards because we've got the strategic thinking. We don't want to get involved in the middle management issues. We like the higher thinking, and we can be very innovative and very adaptive. So I've got those board roles, and I'm also much more available to my children, much more available to my aging parents, and just choosing big, fun adventures. And yeah, I feel very content and happy.
I don't want to piss off your husband and your family, but would you ever take on a challenge of starting another high growth venture from start?
Promise my husband I wouldn't. However, it's really hard when you look at things and be like, you can make a business out of that. You could. Yeah, I do. I have a couple of ideas. I'm currently navigating a mother who has Alzheimer's disease, and I'm digitally very literate. I'm very health literate, and I'm having a hard time. And I was like, surely there's people all over the world that are also finding this hard. Let's do it better. And I've got a few other course ideas more. But at the moment, my challenge is not to rush into doing something.
When that time comes, good luck negotiating with your husband, but I'm sure you've got this. One of my last questions comes from my daughter, from my 9-year-old daughter. How do you advise young kids? What's your advice for them in terms of what they should look out for in terms of their future career?
I actually speak to quite a few young people, and I say, don't think that you need to know what you want to do. It's madness that we think a 16, 17-year-old brain, which is not formed, should be making long-term life decisions. In my experience, in terms of happiness and fulfillment and joy in their work, I work with coaching quite a few senior execs. It's those that traveled or had some confusion or changed their degrees or felt a little bit lost. I really see the correlation. It'd be interesting research around their job satisfaction, happiness, their leadership skills, because they've had some life experience earlier in life. They've had some challenges. They've had some resilience built. Do you know what I mean? They've had some hardship compared to the ones that went at 16, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to go to uni, I'm going to get that cadetship, then I'm going to be an intern, then I'm going to be a partner. And it's they just feel lost or a little bit empty. And again, this is just very speaking about a few my experiences with talking and coaching. So I actually think you're better off not knowing what you want to do. Go and live and explore and find what you don't want to do. That's the harder thing.
Thanks for that. I just learn, have fun, and see where it goes.
When I work with the university, so much is talking about do the work to work out what you don't want to do before you start thinking about what job you want. Because if you don't want to live in a certain area, that rules out a whole lot of jobs. If you don't want to manage a team, that rules out a whole lot of jobs. If you do want to be able to travel, do you know what I mean? So be really clear about what you do and don't want as a life, and then, build it around that.
What's one word that summarizes your experience as an entrepreneur?
I was like, the first word that came to my mind, and this isn't very positive, is exhausting. So I don't think that's very inspiring. But I would say fun. It is fun. You never know what you're going to experience, and the opportunities that I've had and the things that I've seen and the people I've met, like sitting here talking with you in Dubai. I wouldn't have done that if I was still working as a ward nurse. And therefore my children's world, you know, and the experiences they're going to have in the world wouldn't have been what they are without this experience, whether that's financial or learning opportunities.
And the final question, you mentioned you went into nursing because you wanted to play hockey.
Yeah.
Are you still very active in sports?
Oh, no. Tennis is my new love. After a total hip replacement, hockey is not a very friendly game, but I'm super excited. My 13-year-old is loving hockey, so I get to live vicariously through her, being the annoying mom, yelling out on the sidelines. But yeah, I have incredibly sporty kids now.
No surprises there at all. On that note, we could go on forever, but thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
You too.